1979, waiting for the movie to start, my entire body crackling with anxious electricity. I was so wired up, I thought I might actually spontaneously combust. As the quiet opening credits began, I remember looking around the cinema at the other punters in an attempt to reassure myself that we were all collectively going to be okay. "Look, there's an old woman over there," the voice in my head said calmly. "She's probably quite frail and she doesn't look like she's bothered. You'll be fine." That first viewing passed in an almost orgasmic whirl of fear and remains one of the most genuinely transcendent experiences of my life. Rarely have I been more aware of being alive and in the moment than in the 2 hours that it took the movie to run through the projector that night. People talk endlessly about the damaging effects of horror movies, but too little is heard about the life-affirming power of being scared out of your mind and, in those very rare cases, out of your body. You ask me if I think there's more to this world than the grim realities of aging, disease and death, of mourning and loss, and I will refer you to that first viewing of The Exorcist, during which my imagination took flight, my soul did somersaults, and the physical world melted away into nothingness around me. I don't think that there's a spiritual element to human life. I know it because I have experienced it firsthand, and I have horror movies to thank for that blessing. Since then, I've seen The Exorcist about 200 times. I stopped counting after the first 100, and I can honestly say there isn't a day goes by that I don't think about it, even if only for a moment. I know that sounds mad, and I fully appreciate just how boring I have become on the subject of that film, and how little sense my obsession with it makes to anyone else. I've written books about it, 3 editions of a BFI modern classic which my friend Alan Jones has dubbed Everything You Never Wanted to Know About The Exorcist but was scared Mark was going to tell you anyway, made radio and television documentaries about it, The Ghosts of Prospect Street and The Fear of God, the latter of which now adorns DVD copies of the film, and even been vaguely instrumental in prompting the creation of an extended cut, released in 2000, subtitled The Version You've Never Seen, of which director William Friedkin said, "You better like it, because it's kind of your fault that it happened." And, of course, I've stood outside that house on Prospect Street, stepping into the shadow of Max von Sydow, putting myself into the picture that haunted my childhood and which will surely follow me to my grave. Worse still, I forced my entire family to make the pilgrimage to Georgetown just to parade up and down the precipitous steps which plummet from Prospect Street to M Street and which feature so prominently in the film. First, my long-suffering wife Linda, then more recently my kids and my mother, who haven't even seen The Exorcist. Friedkin was once quoted as saying that on his gravestone would be engraved the words, "The guy who made The Exorcist." He meant it self-deprecatingly, but at least he actually made the damn movie, of which he should be proud. On my gravestone it'll just say, "The guy who bored his family and friends to death with The Exorcist." Of course, The Exorcist is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of my obsession with horror movies. Writing in The Guardian, the journalist and broadcaster Mark Lawson once asked, "Did someone jump out of a cupboard and frighten Kermode at an impressionable age?" Well, I can recall no such event, and nor can any other self-respecting horror fan I know, but from a very early age, horror movies struck a chord deep within me. As a kid, I remember sneaking downstairs after my parents had gone to bed to watch the Monday X film on ITV. To avoid detection, I had to have the sound turned right down, but even without the words, the silent shapes and shadows of those old chillers made perfect sense to me. It was indeed my first real experience of discovering something that was uniquely mine, something that existed outside the domain of my parents' control and authority. And, of course, it was forbidden, secretive, taboo, and therefore irresistible. When I think back to those furtive nights in front of the cathode ray, the titles that stand out are old hammer flicks like The Quatermass Experiment, aka The Creeping Unknown, and The Curse of Frankenstein, alongside the Vincent Price frightener The Fly, which became my favourite movie of all time for about a week. I clearly remember walking to school one windy morning and reciting the entire plot of The Fly to a goggle-eyed friend who got so creeped out by my animated description of insect heads transplanted onto human bodies, and vice versa, that he literally started to cry. And I vividly recall returning home one afternoon to find that my father had left specific instructions with my mother not to let the kids watch Village of the Damned, which was playing on BBC One that evening. The next day was hell on earth for me, because it seemed that every other kid at school had stayed up to watch this tale of alien children taking over a small English village, and no one could talk of anything else. There were even kids who had brought in the book, John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos, just to relive some of the more terrifying moments in the playground. I was mortified. It was, to quote the underrated farting kids' fantasy flick Thunderpants, the worst day of my life ever. It's surely no coincidence that I spent many subsequent years obsessing about Village of the Damned, tracking down articles about the film in old movie magazines, reading everything John Wyndham had ever written, from the Kraken Wakes to Chocky to Jizzle and more, and even surreptitiously attempting to persuade my parents to take us for a nice day out at Letchmore Heath, where I knew that many of the key scenes of Village had been filmed. When I came to write my PhD thesis about modern English and American horror fiction 15 years later, I would devote a lengthy section to the Midwich Cuckoos and its place within the canon of paedophobic literature. To this day, the very thought of Village of the Damned gives me an illicit tickle. Significantly, I can't remember where I finally first saw it, only where I first didn't see it. If there is a moral behind all this, it is surely that attempting to repress something will only cause it to resurface elsewhere, bigger, stronger, and nastier. I'm living proof of the inherent failure of censorship. If you tell me that I can't watch something, then my desire to see it immediately will be equal and opposite to the force of your refusal. You know, like that law you learnt about in physics lessons. Let's call it Newton's law of motion pictures. I'm honestly certain that if my father had never told my mother to tell me that I couldn't watch Village of the Damned, I would have forgotten all about it long ago. As it is, at the age of 46, I still feel an irresistible urge to slam my old VHS copy of the movie into the machine right now, just because I can. This electrifying awareness of the forbidden was clearly hardwired into my psyche at an early age, and frankly, it's never gone away. Nor would I want it to. I've had fantastic times watching things I was told not to watch, and I pity those who have never known the delicious pleasure of good, honest visual guilt. Look at Lars von Trier, whose recent movie Antichrist has been wrongly dubbed the most shocking movie ever. Von Trier reportedly grew up in a fantastically liberal Danish household in which rules were frowned upon, and look what it did for him. He's now a self-confessed neurotic depressive who is afraid of everything in life and makes movies about people cutting their genitals off with scissors. As for me, I was told clearly from an early age that certain things were just plain wrong, and I'm now a very happy horror film fan who has derived hours of harmless pleasure from watching people pretend to disembowel each other with chainsaws. And I sleep like a baby, since you ask. Righto then, there's no point in putting it off any longer. It's time to deal with the man and the woman and the mysterious piece of lace corsetry in Krakatoa east of Java. Or maybe not in Krakatoa east of Java. Let's see. I've popped into HMV and bought a copy of the film on DVD, a snip at £5. It's astonishing that such a valuable piece of my childhood can be purchased so easily and so cheaply. Nothing seems to have value anymore. I slip the DVD into my laptop so that I can watch it while I write, another modern miracle. The film starts with a split-screen montage of a volcano exploding and a hot air balloon skittering through the skies, which, as we've established, is pretty much all I remember about the movie, other than that primal scene, which probably isn't even there anyway. After that, the first 15 minutes are taken up with plodding plot exposition, the loading of the ship, introducing the passengers, establishing their personal needs and quirks, the usual disaster movie fare. At some point in all of this, we meet a vibrantly attired Barbara Whirl, who I vaguely recognise from a couple of Elvis movies. I pause Krakatoa and check the Internet Movie Database, and there she is, hot from supporting roles in Charrow, Harem Scarum and Tickle Me, the last of which has the honour of being the very worst film the King ever made, which is really saying something. Miss Whirl looks great, but she's blonde and her travelling companion is a clean-shaven Brian Keith, so it's clearly not going to be them getting their fingers caught in the corsetry. A far more likely pair of canoodling candidates are Maximilian Schell and Diane Baker, who take top billing and fit the physical description of the film playing in my head. He is dark, brooding and bearded. She is auburn and mysterious. Yep, the more I look at the pair of them meeting on the gangplank, the more I can imagine him being heroically injured and her nursing him back to health with the aid of a piece of string. Or lace. Whatever. That is, of course, assuming that the scene is in the film, which it almost certainly isn't. But guess what? It is, and a mere 19 minutes into the action. I wasn't making it up. I am stunned. Maybe this book isn't going to be a bunch of half-remembered falsehoods, fictions, and outright lies as predicted. I got the people wrong, however, and indeed almost everything else, so probably falsehoods, fictions, and lies after all. But there's just enough of an echo of the scene which I described earlier to suggest that the fantasy film playing in my head actually was inspired by real events. Here's what really happens. During that early scene with Barbara World, her character Charlie meets manly Maximilian Schell on the gangplank and gives him her card, boasting that she is a popular singer available for weddings, social occasions, and smokers, whatever smokers were, and even before I knew the answer to that question, they sounded saucy. It is also established that her partner Harry, Brian Keith, is a diving expert of some renown and is embarking upon this voyage in order to earn money through his legendary salvaging skills. She's flirty, he's grumpy, they're both broke, and thus when they retire to their cabin below decks, they begin to bicker. We, meanwhile, find ourselves hiding in the closet, in which Ms. World promptly starts to hang her clothes, the camera peering out in an eerie pre-echo of Carl MacLachlan's Peeping Tom from Blue Velvet, while Harry playfully badmouths Charlie's singing career. "You were so lousy," he says dismissively, throwing himself fully clothed onto his bed, "you put your piano player to sleep." "Maybe," she says with a minxy smile, slamming the closet doors shut, "but I knew how to keep you awake, Harry." And suddenly this putative disaster movie turns into a musical, replete with non-diegetic orchestral accompaniment as Charlie grabs the end of the four-poster bed and starts to sing, swaying suggestively. "I'm looking for an old-fashioned boy," she trills, "who's looking for—" The camera angle changes, and there it is. There's the shot I remember, the shot with the man lying prostrate on his back, seemingly disabled by sleep or booze rather than injury, his head to the left of the frame, her body in the background, the camera skulking behind the bed, peering out from the skirting board. An old-fashioned girl. As she sings this last line, Charlie turns her bustle toward the bed and, let's not be coy, gently shakes a tail feather, looking over her shoulder as she does so, slightly lifting the hem of her jacket to accentuate the ribbon tied somewhere other than around the old oak tree. Harry yawns theatrically, but I'm starting to doubt his disinterest. Just a nice, old-fashioned girl like me. Stirred from feigned slumbers, Harry reaches out his hand, as I had remembered, only quicker and with far less ambiguity, and pulls on the ribbon with practised dexterity. In a flash, the ribbon comes undone, and the camera follows the falling skirt swiftly to the floor, revealing ample light blue petticoats beneath. He yawns again, and then snorts like a braying horse. This is a lot racier, and a lot less symbolically suggestive than I had remembered. No wonder they upped the certificate from U to PG for the DVD. Back to the action, Charlie kneels to pick up the red dress and starts to walk away from the bed, singing, "I want a boy who's happy that I," and on the word I, she gives a suggestive dip and holds the discarded skirt up to her bosom, apparently hiding behind its crumpled pleats in a gesture that stretches the boundaries of coquettishness. "Can blush, because I'm bashful and shy," and with that, she drop-kicks the skirt across the room toward the bed, its silky folds opening in mid-air like a giant crimson butterfly as it soars straight toward the camera, which rests once again behind the man's bed. From here on in, it's effectively a well-behaved striptease, with Whirl shedding her jacket top, the arms of which she waves like Hoofer's tassels, before draping it upon Harry's tutting head. He moves to throw it away, but winds up using it as a pillow, while all the time continuing his Benny Hill-style parody of sleepiness. The man tired but tempted, the woman needy and naughty, a dynamic which seemed to be the norm for all nudge-wink family entertainment in those days. The clothes continue to come off, but there's little chance of nakedness. After 5 minutes of theatrical undressing, Miss Whirl is still covered from head to foot in the most modest of undergarments, which seem to exist in never-ending layers of mystery. If she walked out down the street like this today, she'd still look overdressed. Suddenly, the sound of castanets fills the air and things take a decidedly Latino turn. Hola! Harry bangs his head on the bedside.